So how about we bring in Anthony from Missouri, pronouns he, him. Apparently, he wants to talk about the singularity and the Kalam cosmological argument. Anthony, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Coming in loud and clear.
Okay. I called the other day and spoke with Matt, and it was a show with Matt and Owen Morgan, I believe.
Okay.
I'm looking at the screen now, and basically, Matt said I needed to call and talk to you because you were like the resident physicist here.
That is true.
So I'm the one in trouble. Okay.
Yeah, you're on call.
So I was accused of much ignorance, and I can admit that a little bit, but I think the Kalam cosmological argument is a reasonable way to justify faith in a God. It doesn't specify what type of God that is, but just an immaterial cause. And as I was talking to Matt, we kind of got hung up on the singularity and the nature of the singularity. And so I'm calling to ask you, my thinking is, without having much physics education, that as you go and approach the singularity, the Big Bang singularity, I guess is what that's called, our physics breaks down, and there's no demonstrable way to say what's going on at that point. And it's just like everyone throws up their hands. They don't know what to say about it. There's nothing that we can observe or assert is true or not. And so at that point, my mind says, well, how can we think about that logically? Can we at least determine the available options? And my reason leads me to say, well, it's either something or it's nothing, as like the most basic way of thinking about that. So, and then of course you got to define what that something is. But at the very, very least, it's either nothing or something. And I think most people agree that it's something. Is that correct?
Actually, no, because there are models of the universe being caused by literally tunneling from nothingness into our universe. That is one model that exists that's so far consistent with our theories and our data, as far as we can tell at this point. So not even that is necessarily agreed on by physicists.
Okay. Is that...
I know that should be mind-boggling. How can nothing produce a whole universe? But especially if you were talking about the beginning of time, then it's really hard to talk about anything outside of time or before time without that reference. So in many important ways, it's still the case that up to the earliest moments that we can actually describe with space and time, something is there. But to go then outside of that, you can describe tunneling out of nothing into our existence in the same sort of way. Again, in quantum mechanics, there is this idea of tunneling through a barrier. So this is actually one of the fundamental things they teach you in like your first semester of quantum mechanics, of how to solve for particles going through walls, basically. Now, naively, you can't go through walls. At best, you can go over walls if you have enough energy. But quantum mechanics says, actually, no, there's a probability that you can tunnel through a barrier. All it depends on how much energy you have and how tall the wall is. And it can also work out that you can treat this as a barrier between everything like before and after some arbitrary point far back in time. And this is at least allowed. Is it the best model? I don't know, because ultimately we're getting into questions of aesthetics, because we can't decide on empirical evidence right now, or if we're trying to consider other questions and other things this might solve as another model that could potentially explain things. Sean Carroll and one of his grad students 20-ish years ago, Chen and Carroll had a model where basically at the singularity, and technically there's no singularity because that's actually not allowed by quantum mechanics, it seems, that you have time going in both directions. And so there's never any point that there is a before time existing. It's just that there's an inflection point basically of what direction that we are calling the direction of time. And ultimately, because the way we describe the direction of time is based on the concept of entropy, sometimes called disorderliness. But basically, if you have a gas, it tends to expand and fill a room, not just collapse into the corner. And that's the one way you can tell if the tape is running forward or backwards. Same sort of thing. You have expansion in both directions. And so those would have different eras of time because their entropy is going in opposite directions, seemingly. And this is, as far as we can tell, consistent theoretically with everything we know. So it's another model of a universe that's always existed in some form, no God or supernatural required. But I want to step back on something else that you had mentioned, that you thought the Kalam cosmological argument, I'm sorry, I need more coffee. The Kalam cosmological argument is a good grounds for believing in a supernatural entity of some sort starting things. Why does it have to be supernatural? Can we go to that point?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I'd like to get back to some of the things you said, though, if I can later.
Okay.
My understanding is that I'll just kind of summarize my quick view. I mean, I think you've heard all the arguments before, but I think there's a difference between what science would define as nothing and what philosophy would define as nothing. And so, as I look at this from a perspective of not being a physicist, I think the what science defines as nothing is actually something. And so, if there's something, then I guess in a similar like way, there's got to be there's a problem of infinite regress. And so, if the problem of infinite regress is legitimate, then that opens up the door for an immaterial cause for the existence of matter. And then from that standpoint, an immaterial cause would necessarily be the label that we attach to God. I mean, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
So let's make sure there's an issue I see with the logic here. You're basically saying, hey, we have an infinite regress if we use material causes. So let's bring in something supernatural whose only defining feature is somehow, some way, it doesn't have this infinite regress problem. Why does something supernatural as a cause somehow not have the infinite regress issue? Why can't there also be an infinite number of supernatural causes? Why is it that once it's supernatural, somehow magically, and I'm using magically to be a little bit play on words here, why does it magically all of a sudden not have the same logical causal problem?
Because even though once you get into that singularity and that matter, time as we know it breaks down, but there's still matter in the singularity and in that infinite reality. So there is some
no, because again, there's two things there. One is, first off, we don't actually think there was a singularity. We don't think singularities are actually physical. Our math breaks down before we get to the singularity point, and as best as we can tell, the final form of quantum gravity won't allow for singularities. That seems to be where our physics is pointing. And secondly, if there's no space and there's no time, there's no matter because there's no place to put the matter. So I don't know where you're getting this idea of there being matter around without space and time.
Okay. Well, then that would imply that there's literally a philosophical nothing, if I'm understanding you correctly. And if there's a philosophical nothing, then there has to have been an immaterial cause for the something.
But then it begs the same question: what caused that supernatural? What's it?
Okay.
And you got the same problem again, unless you just declare whatever supernatural somehow doesn't need an explanation. And I'll just say the beginning of time doesn't need an explanation because there's nothing before it. It's literally not possible to be before it. So if we're just going to, make up definitions and just say this has the property of it gets around my problem, we're not explaining things. We're explaining things away.
Yeah, Anthony, I've heard this quite a few times from theists in general, where they define God as like this ultimate cause, right? So it's like, well, we need an ultimate cause. God is an ultimate cause, therefore God. Which that just doesn't, as Aaron was saying, right? Like that doesn't follow. We could do the same thing and just say, okay, well, the ultimate cause was whatever it was, right? Like it doesn't follow.
isn't that exactly what you're doing though? When you say, well, nothing caused this, aren't you doing the exact same thing? You're appealing to, well then, I don't know how you're justified by saying nothing caused something, and I'm not justified for saying an immaterial something caused something.
Because Aaron's
because
not
it still
saying
begs the
nothing.
question. Yeah, and most importantly, you still have the same issue that you're saying. If we can basically stop and say all there is the universe, what you're saying, all there is the universe and God is that thing that somehow doesn't need a cause or explanation. One way or another, you are creating something that just declares itself, I don't need an explanation. And that is basically just saying, well, we can either go back all the steps we can actually demonstrate with science, or we can throw in something with all the same problems, and now it takes all this extra baggage of things that we can't demonstrate.
It's worth noting, too, that within the realm of the scientific method, right, you want to make the fewest amount of assumptions possible. So within the realm of the empirical, to take it that additional step that you're proposing is making an assumption that we simply can't make. We're trying to make the fewest amount of assumptions possible to, get at the core of what's going on in the world around us. And, as it stands, appealing to something because you feel like it needs to be there, there's not really any room for it.
I don't think it's that I think it needs to be there. I think it's a logical necessity. And if it goes back to how you define what nothing is, I think there's a logical necessity that if there's absolutely philosophically nothing, then if it's caused, it has to be an immaterial cause by definition.
But again, the immaterial thing has the exact same problem. You're still talking about causality. You're just saying, here's this other substance that we call supernatural or immaterial, and somehow causal logic doesn't work for it. It just does exactly what it needs to do for the Kalam cosmological argument. And if I may note, I can take the same argument from the Kalam and actually use it to argue that cause must be material. Would you like that argument?
Can I respond to what appears to be the contradiction that you're saying real quick? You
I think that's fair. Go for it.
Let's assume that the universe was eternal. What prevents the immaterial cause from having the same problem? If the universe is material, it by nature has some aspect of time related to it, which is what creates the infinite regress problem. If there's no time involved because there's no material, and that's the connection. The material demands time. So if the material universe was always existing, then that creates the infinite regress problem. The reason why the immaterial gets out of that is by the definition that it's not material. Therefore it's not subject to time. That's my response.
So that actually then brings up another huge logical problem. If it's timeless, how does it do anything? Because the act of doing is itself temporal.
I don't know. I don't know that answer.
I would call that a logical problem. You are talking about an intemporal thing doing something very temporally. How is that any different than just saying, hey, time does what it does?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that, but I'm not so sure that it's more of a misunderstanding or a not understanding than a logical problem. Because
I would actually say it's somewhat incoherent to talk about actions and doings and causes outside of time, because all of our conceptions of causation is temporal. Having atemporal causation is like looking for things north of the North Pole. It sounds incoherent.
Well, I guess in both cases, then it's incoherent, because I can't just go back to the other and say, well, the infinite universe makes sense. So that might be why some people appeal to the necessity of a first cause.
Quite true, though, Anthony, right? Because, from Aaron and I's perspective, we're looking at this and saying, there are several different models and hypotheses that exist to explain, how we get to the Big Bang, and the physics of it all is quite a bit over my head. But we have this open question with a bunch of models that attempt to answer it using data and using, experimental work and modeling and simulations, et cetera. And we're comfortable looking at that and saying, we don't know what the answer is. Right. But what you've done and what I find a lot of theists tend to do is they look at that open question, and it makes them like feverishly uncomfortable. And so that's where they stick the ultimate cause, and they say, well, whatever it was, it had to have a cause. Well, why does that cause need to be God, right? Why aren't you comfortable just looking at the same data that Aaron and I see and saying, well, we don't know?
Well, I get to that point when you ask me about certain things about, well, why this or why that with the immaterial cause, I don't know. But I think at the end of the day, once you start getting back before our physics can actually say anything, it becomes a philosophical issue versus an actual demonstrable issue. Because
in that case, let's do a little bit of philosophy together. I want to hop onto the Kalam, but show actually how it's atheistic. So the basic form that you're going to see is everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe begins to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. Now, here's the kicker. When you say the word cause, there is some extra complexity we can add there, because the idea of cause we usually put into 4 different categories created by our friend Aristotle. And one of them is the material cause. So we can run the exact same argument. Everything that began to exist had a material cause. The universe began to exist, therefore it had a material cause. And everything that justifies that statement, our empiricism about it, what seems intuitive about it, etc., all of that implies exactly that whatever the cause for the universe is also material, because it's the exact same chain of logic.
Okay. Which is nothing more than the argument that's used to defeat the premise 2, if I'm not mistaken, for the Kalam cosmological, the Kalam argument.
I'm saying even if we accept both premises of the Kalam, I'm saying it also leads just well to atheism, because it implies that the cause is material, because all causes have, so all outcomes, all events have a material cause. Since everything seems to have a material cause, then this other thing will have a material cause. The exact same logic that is used to bolster the Kalam cosmological argument should also bolster the specifics of the causal, of the material causal version of the Kalam cosmological argument. You basically then have to say, you follow all the logic of the Kalam, except when it gets to anything non-supernatural. And that's a great way to show there's either something wrong with the argument or it's a bunch of bluster.
Okay. Does that argument that states that every physical thing that has a beginning has a physical cause, that's not in the sense of an eternal, that's not like saying the sun was a physical cause.
If you start making exceptions for this, then you've made exceptions to the Kalam, and that you've now lost its validity or its soundness. Well, if you are saying it's not sound there, then you can't actually use this as an argument for anything. Once you've declared the argument unsound, you cannot use it to get to any conclusions, supernatural or otherwise.
Well, I'm just trying to understand the argument, first of all. Are you talking about like something from nothing type of physical cause?
I'm just talking the very basic 2 premises of the Kalam. Everything that began to exist had a material cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a material cause.
Okay. Well, you would have to go back and look at the nature of the premises then. So
I just gave you the 2 premises. I see them.
Right.
They're fine.
And so the premises of the Kalam are always argued, the first one and the second one, mostly the second one. So we would have to compare premise number 1. Everything that begins.
No, I'm saying I'm going to just go ahead and accept both premises, and therefore the conclusion is the cause of the universe is material.
Okay, well, I'm not understanding you. The first premise.
I'll say it one more time. I'll give you the argument one more time. It's almost identical to what you're going to see from William Lane Craig. There's just one additional word because I'm making it specific. Everything that began to exist had a material cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe had a material cause.
Okay. The difference between the Kalam and that is premises number 1 is almost absurd, because you're indicating that material caused material. And that type of contradiction doesn't.
But here's the thing:
premises one.
How do we actually accept that premise without the word material? Because here's what's going to be like Bill Craig is going to do. He's going to say, "Well, look, we see this all the time that there are nothing that is uncaused out there, and I'm just taking the exact same logic and saying, hey, the exact same intuition, the exact same empiricism that has there is also the case that everything I've ever seen, every outcome I've ever seen, had a material cause." There's never been an effect without a material cause. And that is what Bill points to argue for his stuff. And I'm just pointing out, hey, there are 4 kinds of causes. One of them is material cause. Why is this the exception, Bill? Why is this the exception? And I'm saying Bill because it's William Lane Craig that has been pushing this the most since the 1970s. I think that's when he wrote his thesis on this.
The logic, the syllogism is valid.
Is identical.
But it's not sound. But it's not sound because premises 1 contains a contradiction.
How does the premise contradict itself?
Because you're saying material caused material when there's no material there to cause the material. I'm sorry?
Here's the thing. What I am pointing out is the very logic forces us to say the beginning of the universe had to have had something material, in which case there never was a case of nothing. This would actually have to force there to be a material cause to the beginning. There was never nothing. Even on this version of the Kalam cosmological argument, the only difference is it implies atheism.
Or it assumes an eternal universe. Or an eternal...
I didn't say that. I literally accepted premise 2, the universe began to exist. I'm literally taking the Kalam and I'm just making it about material causation. And I'm getting the result that the universe was caused by material, not something supernatural. Again, I'm using the exact same logic, the exact same functionality, the exact same reasons for thinking these premises are true that other people use to argue for the supernatural, but actually showing, if we take a step back and realize, hey, there's a little bit more precision we could have here. Oh, well, shit, this doesn't work now, does it?
I understand you're using the same logic, but the problem is that if the universe had a material cause, that would imply the existence of material. And so what you're doing is you're assuming an eternal existence of some type of material, which is nothing more than saying that the universe is eternal, which runs into the regress problem.
Isn't that the same thing said about God, that is also eternal? I don't see a problem other than declaring it can't be, even though I literally just proved with your own premises that it has to be. I literally used your exact logic of the Kalam to prove materialism.
Your answer to my last critique was, well, why doesn't God have to be subject to eternal regress? Because he's immaterial, and that's the difference. Your argument.
No, the thing is, here's the thing. You said immaterial things are non-temporal, and that's the only property it has to get out of this. But guess what? Non-temporal things don't do things in time. There you go. No problem for me. Lots of problems for you to explain that you even said you don't know. I am taking the exact same logic that even got you there and showed, hey, it's also completely consistent with physicalism, materialism, non-supernaturalism. The fact that I can run the Kalam and get to no God should really show you that maybe if you want to get to theism, you want to try a different route.
I don't think you get to no God. I think you end up with a contradictory.
I just showed you. It's not contradictory. You just don't accept it.
It wasn't convincing because your response to me was, well, doesn't God have the same problem? And I said no. The difference is whether
I said
or not
there's no contradiction. You just declare there is. And here's the thing. Everything that begins to exist has a material cause. Where's the contradiction in that statement?
The contradiction is that if matter began to exist, it would require a material cause based off the terms of the premise. So you have matter creating matter. And that's fine.
Which does all the time. Matter creates matter all the time. If you want to see matter creating matter, go get some rabbits. They'll create lots more rabbits very easily. So matter creating matter is something we see in our world happening on a minute by minute, second by second basis. There's no question that happens.
That's why at the very beginning I was trying to understand the nature. Are you talking about some physical thing transforming itself into another physical thing, or are you talking about the actual existence of some new substance? That's where I was trying
I'm
to
talking
clarify at the very
about
beginning of
Aristotle's definition of material cause, that every single thing, every single effect had some material that was the cause of the effect. And the exact same reasons that we use for saying that everything that begins to exist has a cause has the exact same reasoning behind to say everything begins to have a physical or a material cause.
So when it says that, when you say that, when Aristotle says that every physical thing has a physical cause, does that mean turning a tree into a chair and say, voila, here's my chair, but it had a physical cause? Or am I just saying, snap my fingers? Well, that would be immaterial. If I don't even understand how the physical can create a brand new something out of thin air, a new substance from a physical cause. Does that make sense? That's
Are you familiar with the relationship between energy and matter? E equals mc squared.
Only to the point where if there's matter, there's energy. If there's energy, there's matter. So when I say
and one
matter,
can turn into the other, change into the other, and so long as it's basically just stuff switching back, there's no physics problem here. It's really weird, Anthony. You seem to be saying that basically everything that we see happening every single day is somehow physically impossible. And I'm just saying everything we see shows, hey, there is a material cause behind it, and I'm just going to apply the exact same logic to the beginning of the universe. And the only problem is you don't like it because it doesn't allow for God then.
No, the only reason why I don't like it is because it demands an eternal physical universe, which falls into infinite regress.
No,
that's the only reason why I don't like it.
Because here's the thing, the statement is something that has a beginning. Everything that begins to exist has a material cause.
Like rabbits.
Among many other things,
so
yes. If we say the universe began to exist, if we're saying the universe began to exist, therefore it had a beginning, then premise one, premise two, conclusion is the universe had a material cause.
Well, if you go back to your example of the rabbits, yeah, that rabbit that I see had a material cause. It was the rabbit before, and that rabbit before, and that rabbit
and
before.
Now show me an example of any effect. Show me anything in the universe, an effect without a material cause. And then we can talk about your logic here as even worth discussing.
The only thing in question is the existence of matter.
No, there's no question about it. It's here. It's here. I can see plenty of it.
This is why when we go back to asking why there is something rather than nothing, it exits physics and it enters into philosophy. And
well, here's the thing. I'm already in the philosophy. I'm already standing here and showing you it doesn't lead to your conclusions. So saying where it leads to, it's like, I know where it leads. I'm standing in front of you. I already am ahead of you in this conversation. So now answer my question. Give me an example of an effect without a material cause.
Well, I would argue the existence of matter.